announcements. As we talked last time, we will once again be holding the holiday shopping spree for the Westwood Transitional Village for the benefit of our guests. The Westwood Transitional Village is operated by the Salvation Army. It's a residential facility that helps homeless families transition to independent living. And it has been one of our signature projects for more than 30 years. This year, we're planning to host 20 children from the village. Volunteers will be paired up with children. We do need some more volunteers. Diane, I believe you said we have 15 so far. Is that right? Everybody's on mute.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so we would love to get 5 more, or if more than 5 additional members volunteer, we could sponsor more than 20 children, but there are several of us who will sponsor more than 1 child if necessary. So we're going forward with 20. Our budget for this year is estimated at $1,500 for holiday gifts and food, and the children will share with us a wish list of gifts they want to get for their families. And then we help them obtain those gifts, and then there's a special dinner that I'll talk about in a second. We're also inviting all of the members, whether you have time to volunteer or not, to donate to help cover the cost of the event, whether it's $50 or $25 or $100, whatever it is, it all helps. Then individual Zoom sessions will be held with the children on November 30th, so the children can share their wish lists. After that, the volunteers will order or shop for gifts on the children's wish list, and then gifts will be delivered or dropped off at the village in early December. And I'm sorry, I just have to admit somebody. And then a holiday dinner will be held for the children on the evening of December 10th. So if you haven't already volunteered, please feel free to put your name in the chat box. And if you want to donate, you could either put it in the chat box, you could tell Diane or me or Terry. It's very easy. Terry can add it to your account, or you can send a check, whichever is most convenient for you. And I think this year more than ever, this event is very meaningful to those children. And I wanted to mention that the district is holding a membership seminar this Saturday at 11:30. And I put it up because I think of membership as being all of our responsibilities, not just Mike's, but all of us. And you never know when you're going to find a good idea. I have participated in other districts' membership events. I participate in every event that I can for the reason that, as I said, you just never know when you're going to hear an idea that might work for your club. So I encourage members, certainly the board, as well, to take the time to join in. It's only an hour. It's on Zoom, so you don't even have to go anywhere. So something to think about. And then I just found out that the Zone 26 and 27 are holding a Rotary Gratefulness Week. I think under these conditions, it should be a 12-month observance, and especially during a renewed surge. And our club has done some things earlier in the year. I bring it up once again because there's so many ways that we can reach out and be of help to essential workers, whether it's a meal card or dropping off meals at a hospital. There's so many ways that we can help. And there are more ideas, information, and suggestions on the district website. So I encourage that as well. And, you know, it seems early for this. It seems like we're barely more than halfway through the month, but we are dark next week because of Thanksgiving. And our next meeting is December 3rd. So I wanted to take time once again to recognize a member who truly lives the word service above self. And that is our treasurer, Terry White. And I know we can't see or hear you, but I hope you can see and hear us. And Terry not only does all that he does really in a quiet way without calling attention to himself, but it's all done with excellence and professionalism. And what I think most people don't even know are all the ways that Terry extends himself. He took on the accounting for our endowment fund when Don Nelson was no longer able to do so. So Terry, first of all, it's great to work with you. I really thank you for everything that you do. And I will be sending you a certificate and pin very shortly. I wish I could present them to you personally, but I guess that would be not kosher during a pandemic. So again, thank you again, and congratulations.
Thanks, thanks, Nancy, and my pleasure.
Oh, well, and you know what? You make it seem like a pleasure. You truly do. You truly do. And that's why I say it's wonderful to get to work with you. Now I'm going to turn things over to our wonderful program chair, Tom Barron, who is going to introduce our guest speaker. And he explained to us that his last name is pronounced Wang, correct?
Correct. Right.
And not the way I was pronouncing it when I introduced him earlier.
Thank you, Nancy.
So thank you, Tom. Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Nancy.
And I'm going to stop. I'm going to turn off.
Last year, I heard Robert Wang speak at another event and was so enamored with his talk, I bought his book and read it, and The Opium Lord's Daughter. And here it is, right here. And it's even a signed copy. Can you believe that? Not knowing much about the Opium Wars, this book gave me an interesting read of a fictional story entwined with historical perspectives of both Chinese and Western cultures. Robert's years of researching the history, facts, and fictions of the Opium War gives one an understanding the havoc drug empires exert on society, even to this day. It's no wonder the Opium Lord's Daughter was the winner of the Independent Press Award of 2020 for multicultural fiction. But this is not just fiction. It is a history of the Chinese politics and how modern China has been shaped. Robert was born in Japan and raised in Hong Kong before moving to the United States. Although he is Chinese-American businessman, an entrepreneur and pioneer in the aerospace industry, he has always been fascinated by this period of China in the 1840s. This passion only grew as he noted the modern parallels, the opioid crisis, that echo similar events and actions today. Believe me, this is not a press release material, but this is the best book I have read in some years, truly. So it is my privilege to introduce Robert Wang. Robert, you're up.
Thank you so much. Let me put up my.
You can. Do you see the screen, the green screen share button?
Yes.
Okay, click on that, and then it should take you to a. There you are. There you go.
Here we go. Great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the introduction, Tom, and thank you very much, Nancy. And I'm delighted to address the Rotary Club and to talk about my book and talk about what's going on in China. You know, a lot of people are interested in Hong Kong and whatnot. I grew up in Hong Kong, and I still have a lot of connections over there. So I have a different perspective than a lot of other people who are getting the information from the media. So let me start. If I told you that I wrote a book about East-West trade war, rampant drug addiction, and somewhat unstable government leadership, you think I'd be writing about current affairs. What I wrote about happened 180 years ago. And it was between Great Britain, the superpower of that era, and China, who had the most population in the world at that time. And history has a habit of repeating itself. And there are many, many challenges we face today that are not that different than what people 180 years ago faced. So people have heard about the Opium Wars. Most people have heard about it, but don't know much about it. And if I was addressing a group, I would ask the group, how many of you have been to Hong Kong? And I can tell a lot of you would raise your hand that you have visited Hong Kong. And then I would ask how many of you knew that it was a British colony. A lot of you would raise your hand also. And now I would ask, did you know why Hong Kong became a British colony? And less people would raise their hand. And then I would say, and do you know the details of the Opium War that caused Hong Kong to be taken over by the British Empire? And even fewer people will raise their hand. Well, I was there for Hanover in 1997. It's a very, very moving experience. And I was very happy to see Hong Kong return to mainland China, regardless of what my view and anybody's views are about China's governance, whether it's under communist regime or otherwise. But the fact that Hong Kong was returned to China was a very moving experience for me and many, many other people. So let me start by describing what caused the Opium War. Oops. So England wanted a lot of products from China, primarily tea. Tea became such a huge market. They were importing millions of tons per year. Everybody had tea time at 2:33, and the British and other European consumers liked other stuff from China, such as porcelain, spices, furniture, and whatnot. And they wanted to trade with China. But China would only take silver, nothing else from England. China at that time, they were very, very afraid of outside influence and outside people. They did not allow a lot of outside influence to enter China. But they were happy to sell their tea and other merchandise to the traders, but they would only take silver. They didn't think that they needed anything else. They didn't know how wrong they were, but they didn't think they needed anybody else. With so much trade going on, England would not have enough silver to buy all the merchandise that it wanted to get from China. So they came up with a brilliant idea of using opium from India, which is a British colony, as we all know, and selling and having the opium smuggled into China and selling it to the Chinese for Chinese silver. Then they would use that same silver to purchase the tea, the porcelain, the furniture, anything else they wanted to buy. Well, that worked pretty well, except that it got 12 million people in China addicted to opium. And the Chinese government decided that it went too far and that it would not allow any more opium to be brought in. The emperor assigned a, let me introduce the smugglers first. The two largest smugglers of opium were two gentlemen, William JARDINE and James MATHESON. If you've been to Hong Kong, you will see JARDINE MATHESON Company all over Hong Kong. There's JARDINE Hills, where the most expensive estates are built. There's JARDINE House, their headquarters. They own, if you've been to the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, they own that. And the descendants of William JARDINE still runs the company. The annual revenues today as a public company is $60 billion a year. And this company was founded based on opium smuggling. Well, they still own quite a lot of property in Hong Kong. They are extremely profitable. the descendants of JARDINE and MATHESON are treated as royalty and high society patrons of the British Empire. To show you how significant imports were, I made a chart here. These numbers are in tons. Now, opium is a very lightweight substance. So can you imagine what 1,000 tons of this lightweight substance meant? So it started, opium import to China actually started way earlier as a medicine from Arab countries. And then when British traders started buying tea and started using opium as a commodity to trade for tea, it went berserk. I mean, here you are after the first Opium War in 1842, when they signed the Nanking Treaty, opium imports doubled, went up to 5,600 tons a year. No wonder so many people were addicted. When the emperor decided that it was enough opium and they wanted to put a stop, he assigned a special emissary. His name was Lin Xizhu. And his job was to go to Canton. By the way, Canton was the only seaport that allowed foreign traders to unload their merchandise. This is another a move by the Chinese government to limit foreign influence into China. But of course, the smugglers didn't care. They were smuggling in opium to all other provinces outside of Canton. So when Lin Xizhu came down, he did a lot of investigation, and he confiscated over 1,000 tons of opium and destroyed them. What the British then claimed was that Chinese government confiscated British merchandise. They didn't say it was opium, and that the Chinese government threatened the lives of British subjects in Canton. What Lin Xizhu did was he created a siege. Foreign traders were only allowed to enter an area called the factories in Canton. They were not allowed to roam the streets in Canton. They were not allowed to integrate with the Chinese population. So all the business were done within this complex called the factory. What Lin Xizhu did was restricted the foreigners from leaving the factories until they gave up the opium. So what the British superintendent of trade, his name was Charles Elliot, what he did was ask the smugglers to give him the opium, so it is under British ownership, and then he would turn it over to Lin Xizhu. By doing so, he can legitimately claim that the Chinese government confiscated British merchandise without specifying that it's an illegal substance. Well, with the help of William Jardine, who went back to England and lobbied for a war against China, not only did he lobby the parliament, he spent a lot of money in public relations campaign, newspapers, articles, declaring that the Chinese government had threatened the lives of British citizens in China, and that it was England's honor at stake, and that they should send a navy there to teach the Chinese a lesson. Well, what happened was there was a debate in Parliament. It was it went on for 3 days, actually, nonstop, day and night. And at the end, the British Parliament approved the use of force, but the vote was very close. It was 271 to 262. So there was a lot of controversy about it. So how did Hong Kong then become a British colony? Well, it started out with drug addiction, a very corrupt Chinese government. Everybody knew opium was being brought in, but everybody looked the other way because they were getting paid quite a lot of money for looking the other way and allowing the opium to go through customs and whatnot. And the British needed so much product. There was an insatiable appetite for Chinese products, and they could not afford to have the opium trade stop. So the British Parliament, that was one of the reasons why the British Parliament authorized the use of force. Well, the British Navy at that time was the best in the world. The Chinese Navy, I'll show you pictures of it later, was no match. I mean, it was not a one, it was a series of skirmishes that the British fought with China. It was not a war situation, much like World War I and World War II. The British were sensitive to protecting the trade between the two countries. Lin Sisu's position was, let them fight us, but we must fight back because the British cannot afford to stop trade with our country. But the emperor at that time, Wang was his name, he was not really in touch with what was going on. And he only listened to advice given to him by people with hidden agendas, to people that wanted to continue seeing trade happen and not disrupt the trade between England and China. So at the end of the day, after multiple skirmishes that lasted about 2 years in 1842, when the British Navy basically blockaded all the riverways that supplies China and threatened to march into Beijing, that the emperor realized that if he did not make a deal with England, that the Qing dynasty would collapse. And it would be the first time in a long history of China that it would collapse under foreign invasion. So a treaty was signed on board the HMS Wellesley, and the Chinese government really didn't have any choice. They demanded 5 new ports outside of just Canton, and the emperor had to save face and said, okay, I'll tell you what, I'm only going to give you 4. And the British accepted that, and a treaty was signed on board the ship. And here's a portrayal of the signing of the treaty. It was the worst humiliation ever in Chinese history, where China had to bow down to a foreign power, give away property. And by the way, before the treaty was signed, the British Army already occupied Hong Kong. They liked Hong Kong because of its natural harbor. Those of you who've been to Hong Kong will see the harbor between Hong Kong and Kowloon. It's a very, very natural deep water harbor where merchandise ships, namely opium ships, could dock there and then bring opium into Canton from Hong Kong. So it was actually a very good choice for England to take over Hong Kong for the purpose that they wanted Hong Kong to be. Well, in 1842, when the treaty was signed, is what the Chinese government today proclaim as the beginning of 100 years of shame. In fact, Xi Jinping, the president of China today, in his speech last year, referred to 100 years of shame. So with that information, I hope that people will understand why China responds the way it does to the world today. China became a superpower after decades of hard struggle with famine and poverty and political upheavals with Mao Zedong and the Gang of Four and the Cultural Revolution and whatnot. But it pulled himself up by the bootstrap. Deng Xiaoping was the one who started the market economy that allowed allowed China to start trading openly. And since then, as we all know, China has really grown quite a bit. Its population are now mainly out of poverty, and they are one of the largest manufacturers of any kind of product. It's gone through a lot of changes. It's done a lot of things wrong with the environment and copyright infringement, intellectual property, and all that stuff is all true. But China is also evolving at the same time right now, and it's really trying to gain recognition in the world stage. And with that background, you can understand why they would respond to the way that, maybe our government is reacting to China. Chinese people, face is a very important thing for Chinese culture. And in order for anyone to truly understand and do business with China, they need to understand that. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't, because we approach China with a frame of reference of a Western education and Western mentality. So in 1997, China, Macau, we returned to mainland China. I was there for the ceremony. I was quite moved, as I mentioned earlier. So there were Americans involved in opium trade. You'd be surprised, I just named 3 of them that you would know. Ron Dalrymple III, he was head of the Russell Company, the largest opium smuggler, who made a fortune in opium. Well, he turned out to be the grandfather of FDR. Imagine what the history of the United States would be without opium money that his grandfather made. It would not have allowed him the opportunity to run for president. And what would the world be today without FDR? But his grandfather was the largest American opium trader in China. Thomas Perkins, some of you may have heard of him. He's the founder of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, Perkins School for the Blind. He was a founding member of Mass General Hospital. He started out as a slave trader and then moved into opium and made a fortune. And of course, you may or may not know Robert Bennett Forbes. He was John Kerry's ancestor. He made his fortune in opium also in China. So Americans were not so innocent. There were a lot of American traders there, but in fairness, the British were the largest opium smugglers. So I'd like to read you something that was written by Thomas Arnold. He was a British educator and historian during the debates to authorize the use of force. This war with China really seems to me so wicked as to be a national sin of the greatest possible magnitude. And it distresses me very deeply. Cannot anything be done by petition or otherwise to awaken men's mind to the dreadful guilt we are incurring? I really do not remember in any history of a war undertaken with such combined injustice and baseness. Ordinary wars of conquest are to me far less wicked than to go to war in order to maintain smuggling, and that smuggling consisting in the introduction of a demoralizing drug, which the government of China wishes to keep out, and which we, for the look of gain, want introduced by force, and in this quarrel are going to burn and slay in the pride of our supposed superiority. I think his quote says it all, and it reflects how torn the British leadership was about using force to support opium smugglers. But when you think about it though, without opium, how would they trade for Chinese tea? How much would tea cost when everybody drank tea 2 or 3 times a day if they couldn't use opium? Parliament knew that, but unfortunately decided that economic gain was more important than moral positions. So I'd like to share with you some of the things that on my research trip. Oh, Macau. I'm sure lots of you have been to Macau. I don't know if you know the history of Macau, and if you don't, I'm going to share a little bit of history with you on that. Macau was released from China in 1557. The Macau government, the Portuguese government they knew how to deal with the Chinese government and was favored by the emperor of that era. So they had a foothold in the Chinese market and was envy of Europe. Holland, who was a very superior force at that time in history, they wanted to trade with China. They had a trading post in Japan, but they were not that successful in China. So what did they try to do? They tried to invade Macau and take over Macau from the Portuguese. They attacked Macau in 1601, 1603, 1607, and failed. So in 1622, they said, we're not going to mess around anymore. They sent a huge army to invade Macau. Well, they landed and they were marching towards the center of town. Macau was doomed to fall to Holland. So what happened? A Portuguese priest, his name was Giacomo Rowe, he said a prayer and he fired a cannon. That cannon hit the wagon that carried all the gunpowder that supplied the army. And when that wagon blew up, it killed a lot of Dutch soldiers. As a result of that, the invasion was a failure. And the Portuguese considered that divine intervention. So held on to Macau for 300 years until it was going back to China. I think that's a pretty interesting piece of history that a lot of people don't really know, but I thought I'd share with you. So these are what the British had. You know, the Baker rifle that you see in the middle was the most advanced firearm of that age. And the Nemesis you see in the bottom right of the screen was the first steam-powered frigate with cannons that could pivot, and they actually had the first generation of rocket launchers back then. Just that one ship could have destroyed the entire Chinese Navy. Wow. But no, England sent over 70 battleships to China. Oops. These are Chinese cannons. Some of them, they have better ones than that, but that, to me, it's almost a joke. And here's some cultural things that I thought would be interesting. China in this time, especially in the Qing dynasty, not the Qing dynasty, but prior dynasties, starting from Han dynasty, women started to bound their feet. And in my book, I talk about bound feet a little bit, just to share some cultural aspect of China. And these are the people who fought against the British. The Chinese population rose up. The Chinese army was no match, but the people also formed their own militia to counterattack the British. This is a trip out. This is Macau and Canton. And when I did my research trip there, I was very fortunate. I was introduced through UCLA Asian Studies Department, to connect with some of the most learned scholars of the Opium War. And I even had the support of the Chinese government. They had a Politburo member meet with me and supported my research. And actually, they even offered that if my book became successful and if I had it translated to Chinese, they would support a book launch in the Museum of the Opium War in Full Moon, so that more people, so the Chinese people could read my book. And something she did was very, very moving to me. We got together on a Sunday, and I wanted to visit museums on Monday, but Monday are the day that the museums are closed. Well, she made a few phone calls, and lo and behold, the museums were open just for me. So they had a staff in each of the museum I visited, and I was able to ask a lot of questions, took a lot of pictures, and saw a lot of things that were not open to others at that time. The picture you see of the cannon there is Full Moon. Full moon in southern China is sort of the god to the full moon. Actually means tiger's gate. It is to guard against foreign invasions from there, and that is the battle, the big battle that the British launched to break into China. So you see a picture on the left, upper left. That's a typical Chinese Navy warship. And how many cannons are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on each side. The Wellesley alone has 70 cannons in one ship. This is the museum. These two are the museum of the Opium War, and I visited both of them. And this is Full Moon, the Tiger's Gate. This is how they protected them. So the guide that took me there showed me the cannons that were used from this fort. The enemy ship can be directly in front of them, and they can shoot the cannon, and it will not hit the ship because it did not have it pivoted and the capability. So it was a war that was lost before it started. But anyway, that's sort of my end of the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has, and go from there. And again, I thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about my book and the Opium War. And I hope that more people will read it, not because I want to sell many books, but because I really want people to know what happened in China, between China and England back then, and what caused China to have the attitude that they even have today regarding dealing with the West. Personally, I really did not like the British people when I was in Hong Kong. I experienced quite a bit of discrimination. I think the British people in Hong Kong were the extreme white supremacists who ruled Hong Kong. I personally have suffered quite a bit of discrimination in my own hometown, where 99.999% of the population were Chinese. But the British, when they were there, many of them were arrogant and very, very nasty. Not until I went to England for the first time in the early 90s did I realize, no, they're nice people. They are gentlemen and gentle ladies, but they must have sent the worst they had to Hong Kong to work over there. But nonetheless, you know, it was a very interesting upbringing under British rule at that time. With that, I'll open myself to questions.
Thank you, Robert. That was fascinating. Does anybody have a question or a comment?
Nancy, I have a question for Robert, if I may. Thank you for a great presentation. It really gets us into the historical content and context. If you draw a parallel between the Opium War and the drug lords in Latin America, again controlling some of the economic forces in North America, how would you see that relation or that parallel in your own mind, having researched?
That's a very good question, Adele. The common denominator is what I call the institutionalized drug pushing. England was an institutional drug pusher. They knew what they were doing. They knew opium was being used. They knew opium was addictive, and they supported the opium smugglers. Likewise, in the United States today, the pharmaceutical companies are the institutional drug pushers. They promote the use of opioids. A lot of doctors play along with them for profit, and you know, we have the same addiction problem we have in the United States right now. So I don't know if that answers your question, but to me, that is the common denominator.
Indeed, I was just looking for a confirmation or, you know, an independent thinking on that. Thank you for that, Robert.
Sure.
Ed, I see your hand raised. You're on mute, Ed.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I guess it was at 97 where China took over from England, but it seems to me China is violating the spirit of the agreement by cracking down on so-called Hong Kong independence and all of that sort of thing. and there's been a lot of demonstrations and all of that. Why has China abrogated its the treaty with Hong Kong? That was supposed to last, I think, for 50 years until 2047, and now they're reneging. They're reneging, and actually China is irritating most of the democratic countries in the world by doing this.
That's a good question, Edwin. It depends on what point of view you take on this issue. The Chinese government would say that the basic law agreement signed between Deng Xiaoping and Margaret Thatcher clearly stipulates that China is instituting a one country, two system rule for Hong Kong. Hong Kong became a special administrative region, and it was supposed to have its own legislative freedom and whatnot. But China continues to exert its influence to Hong Kong. Now, let me ask you, let's have a hypothetical situation here. Chinese people in general, and Chinese government in particular, are very long-term thinkers. 50 years is short-term to them, and several hundred years is more like, longer term. If Hong Kong was allowed to be completely free and with no influence from China, and China by the way, China would debate with anyone their right to what we call interfere, but their right to offer opinions or whatnot to Hong Kong. No, that's a matter, that's a subject matter that that you can debate, and I don't have a position on that. But imagine if Hong Kong was completely free and open with no Chinese influence for 50 years, and then on July 1st, 2047, the Red Army marches into Hong Kong, everything changes from this way to that way. All freedom is gone, everything is different. What kind of rise do you think you'll see then? Right? So it is a, to me, the way I look at it is that China is gradually and slowly trying to condition the people of Hong Kong. Think about it. If you were born post 1997, if you were born and raised under complete freedom, I completely understand how they're feeling right now. They are fearful, as I would be fearful. I mean, I'm just very lucky that I left Hong Kong in 1972, came to the United States, and I'm a proud US citizen right now. But if you imagine you were stuck in Hong Kong, grew up in a free society, and now you're fearful that the Red Army is going to march in, Hong Kong will be no different than Guangzhou and Shanghai and the other cities. What your life will be, what your children's life will be, that is something that is I'm sure in the minds of the Chinese government, in the minds of the 8 million people in Hong Kong. So in my mind, I'm not justifying what China is doing, but to me, it is their way of gradually asserting influence in Hong Kong, so that it is a gradual transition, if you will. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yes, it does, and it makes a lot of sense. I understand what you're saying.
Thank you.
Tom, you had your hand up.
I knew. Robert, that was a great presentation, and went over it again. That was super. But I have a question about the systems. America was built on a capitalistic system with freedom and liberty. The Chinese they're not capitalistic, obviously it's a dictatorship, yet they're very successful when it comes to the business and advancement. And now all of a sudden, manufacturing, production, everything you call it, they're very, very successful and threatening to grow larger than America. What is it within the Chinese people? Is there something innate in their ability to develop and produce, and they're under a restricted government? I mean, how does it work?
Well, I wish I knew the answer to that. Maybe it's genetics, I don't know. But Chinese people throughout history has been very enterprising people. Now, you raise an interesting point about, how to rule a country like China. China as a country throughout history has been very difficult to govern. It's a country with a very diverse population. They speak over 50 languages. The only thing that tied people together was the written form. And until the written form was simplified under Mao Zedong's regime, only the elite, the wealthy, were educated and could read. So you have basically a very agricultural society in China, but a very enterprising society as well. I think the Opium War is an example of that. People were very enterprising in how they conducted business then, and a lot of people made a lot of money. And given an opportunity, I think most people, regardless of whether you're Chinese or American or European or whatnot, given the opportunity, you want to make a better life for yourself. And that's what happened when Deng Xiaoping opened the market in China to make it a market-driven economy, allowed entrepreneurship, starting out with agricultural products, allowing the communes, which are under government ownership, allowing the communes to grow vegetables and sell their own vegetables. And all of a sudden, more vegetables were grown. All of a sudden, more food was available. So I think it's human nature, not necessarily, the Chinese, Chinese culture or whatnot. Given an opportunity, anyone will want to improve their lives. That's sort of my take on that.
Fascinating. Richard, you're muted.
Yeah, hi. Robert, what's a good place to buy your book and maybe even get one autographed?
Oh, I'd be happy to do that. My book can be bought at Amazon. Just go to Amazon and put my name in, and my book will show up. And I have it in hardbound, paperback, and digital. So you're free to purchase any. If you want my autograph, I'd be happy to sign it for you. When you get it, just let me know, and I'll be happy to do it.
Thanks very much.
Wonderful. Peter. Oh, and then Rose. I'm sorry, I didn't see you. Peter and then Rose, okay?
Robert, terrific presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hong Kong was seceded to the British forever. However, Kowloon and the new territories was a 99-year lease.
Correct.
Apparently, these happened a couple of years apart. Can you give us the background on why there were two deals on the secession and the lease, please?
Sure, absolutely. Hong Kong was granted to England, ceded to England in perpetuity. That's absolutely true. And then JARDINE and MATHESON, actually, those smugglers went into Hong Kong and invested heavily in infrastructure in Hong Kong to make it a safer haven for British subjects to move there, to build there, and sell more opium, all of that. And Hong Kong is a small island. It's only about 120 square miles. Peter, you were raised there, so you know how small it is and how dense it is. And 20 years later, they needed more land. They needed more property. So with a strong arm, they went back to the Chinese and say, now we want to lease more property from you. We want to lease Kowloon and the so-called new territories. This is the land that we want to get from you. But we'll sign a lease this time. We're not going to beat you up for it. We're just, give us a 99-year lease, which they did. And Hong Kong, as you well know, is useless without Kowloon. You cannot really separate the two. And it was the right thing to do when the lease was up, that Hong Kong was included in that package to be returned to China. So that was sort of the reason why there was a ceded in perpetuity versus lease for 99 years, and then the return of both in 1997.
Rose, you had your hand up.
I did. I thank you for an incredible presentation. I have cousins in Hong Kong and we communicate through WhatsApp. And during all the riots, they and they expressed their concern that they wanted the security law passed because they own businesses, and they were very upset about American flags being raised and British flags being waved, and they are feeling very relieved that there is more order in Hong Kong now. My great grandmother, according to my mom, was addicted to opium, and she had to go to a special hospital to become clean. So the history, I was brought up in America, I was born here, but my mother has a different story of the Boxer Rebellion because she was born in Hong Kong. So thank you for your presentation.
Oh, that's fascinating. Are there more questions or comments? Richard, did you have your hand up again? You're on mute again.
Yeah, I'm okay. Thank you very much.
I had
Ed, go ahead.
maybe, I don't know if this makes sense, but maybe you could comment on what seems to be the obsession by China on Taiwan and wanting to take control of Taiwan, maybe like Hong Kong, and then actually, including it in its country.
That's a very good question, Edwin. All right. China considers Taiwan a renegade province. Taiwan is where Chiang Kai-shek and the Republic of China escaped to when Mao Zedong's force was winning. So they set up shop in Taiwan, hoping that they could regroup and go back in, and they were hoping for help from Americans and others to get China back. That didn't happen, obviously. China, as long as Taiwan government does not declare independence, China's okay. Look at Taiwan right now. It has its own parliamentary system. It's got its own currency. It's got its own everything. It is a de facto sovereign country, but they cannot call themselves a independent country, because if they did, China swear they would attack Taiwan militarily. There's a reason for that. If Taiwan can declare independence, what do you think Tibet will do? What do you think Hong Kong will do? What do you think some of the southern provinces would do? Southern provinces are where all the manufacturing and agriculture centers are, and they have to send their money to the central government every year. So if they sit back and see Tibet are independent, Hong Kong's independent, Taiwan's independent, they would want to be independent. China cannot afford that.
Sounds like the breakout of the Soviet Union.
That's
exactly. China is a very diverse country, as I said earlier, and it's a very difficult country to govern, and which is why the communist regime works over there, as long as they are benevolent leadership. And that's also a problem with having a system like that, because if you have a bad leader, then you have a bad, then you're, it's difficult. But the communist regime with a market economy is something that seems to be working fairly well right now. I'm sure there are a lot of things wrong with it, with the human rights violation and all the things that they do that forcing their hand on issues like the Muslim population and other issues that are going on right now. There's a lot of controversy, but at the same time, if you look at the whole picture, there's few famine and poverty is fairly under control in China, except for the outskirts in the rural areas. It's pretty stable right now, and the population are enjoying a certain level of prosperity never available in centuries, frankly. I'm sorry, Michael, you had a question?
Oh,
Yeah.
could I interrupt you 1 second, Mike? I'm sorry. Robert, we normally end at 1:30. I can see there's more interest in hearing from you. So I want to give people who need to leave at 1:30 an opportunity to go. If you're willing to spend a few more minutes with us, I think we would really appreciate that. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
Wonderful. Okay, Mike, over to you.
This may be an impossible question, but with the tit for tat in tariffs and the Chinese, the imbalance in trade, do you see any practical or more simple way for the two countries to get along together in their trade?
Absolutely. I am very hopeful that the United States and China can work together. I'm absolutely very hopeful about that. You know, rather than focusing on what differences we have with China, I'd rather us focus on what's common between two countries. Okay, trade is an important aspect for both countries. Let's work on how we can come up with a policy that will satisfy both governments. It can be done. Now, China has done quite a bit already in terms of intellectual property. I read recently that China is the largest employer of programmers, so that they can come up with their own program. China is hiring their own from outside of China. They're hiring people outside of China to go to China to help them. Car designs, automation designs, robotic designs, and whatnot. Now, I don't know about the military side, because I think China continues to try to take some of our military technology to enhance themselves, but that's a national security thing that I don't want to touch. But in basic trade, there's a lot of common grounds between our countries that we can work through. We have to agree on what we disagree on. For example, human rights violation. China will say, it's our business to stay out of it. The United States will say, well, we'd like to see more democracy over there. And China will say, well, democracy is not our system, so get off my back. I mean, those back and forth will continue for decades to come. But during that time, I'm hoping that China continues to progress at a pace that would allow the population to voice their opinion more, and therefore influence policies that the leadership will institute. Now, you notice that the IPO of Ant was shut down by the government because Jack Ma made a mistake of trying to be political, and I'm sure there were other reasons that we don't know about. But your hands would be slapped right now if you overstep your line. They don't mind people making money. They don't mind people, the population doing well. They don't mind that at all. But what they do mind is interference with the only management system China has today that can control a diverse and large population.
Fascinating.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had one more question. How would you define the present leader of China relative to prior leaders who may have been more liberal economically, human rights and all of that sort of thing? Seems to me he's a particularly strong leader, and perhaps he's not going to last forever. Perhaps somebody else will follow him and be less strong.
Well, that is the risk of the system that they have over there. Under a strong leadership, China will do well. But with this all-empowering, position as president for life, if you get a bad president, it can screw things up pretty badly there, and that's what I worry about. China right now, I think, is under Xi Jinping. I read an article just yesterday, actually. A US company did a survey and found that most people in China, the Chinese population, are satisfied with their leader right now. So that's because he is a very strong leader. I don't want to go into the differences between him and Deng Xiaoping and all the leaders in between, because each leader had his own agenda with China, dating back to Mao Zedong, when you think about it. And every leader since Mao Zedong they were all men, has his own agenda for China. Some are more idealistic, some are more market driven, some are more xenophobic, some are more liberal. So, you know, it's hard to judge hindsight which leader did better and what not. You can only look at what's happening today. And if the population of China in general are doing well, they're not starving. Instead of walking, and they started from walking to bicycles to motorcycles to automobiles now, and even some private jet planes now. So you have to look at the progress of China and make your judgment based on how people are living in China, what the population of China, how they're living and how they're faring compared to the rest of the world. So that's my position. I try to stay out of the the right and wrongs of policies, because I don't know enough about each policy, because I'm not there. I talk to a lot of people there, and I hear different sides of the story, but I'm not smart enough to render a judgment as to which leader is better than which, because this policy worked better than that policy. I'm not smart enough to comment on that. But as long as the people are happy, they're not starving, and they are allowed certain liberties that they were not allowed before, maybe gradually China will soften up, and maybe, probably not within my lifetime, but the next few generations, China will join the world. But the world has to recognize China and give China its rightful due for what it's accomplished. And I think China is dying for that kind of recognition, having gone from what they had, or what they didn't have, to what they have today.
Chris.
Thank you. Very nice.
Chris Bradford, I see your hand.
Robert, just an excellent presentation. Thank you so much for it. And I do look forward to reading your book.
No,
I have
thank
been
you.
to China, I have been to Hong Kong. And as a matter of fact, when I was at UCLA, I studied under Richard Baum, who you may know, he's deceased now. He was the resident China expert, because my major at UCLA was Chinese history and Chinese government.
Is that right? You speak Chinese?
No, not at all, but particularly the Chinese Communist Party and politics there. Was a political science major. So I learned a tremendous amount. Never wanted to go to China because of just the parade of horribles that happened during the Long March and so forth. But I went there 3 years ago, and it was fascinating. And since then, and going to Hong Kong, I have regularly looked at the South China Morning Post, and as a means for information. And I have heard, though, that is that newspaper is controlled by the communist government. Is that true?
No, the South China Morning Post, which I read every day, is not owned by Jack Ma of Alibaba.
Oh.
So in a way, it is a mouthpiece for the government.
Yeah. Well, it's a very interesting paper. Of course, they have an
I liked
app.
it better when it was independent.
Yeah, of course. All right. Well, that answers my question. I appreciate knowing that. But again, thank you so much for speaking to us today.
Not at all. My pleasure.
Here. That was excellent.
You still have family in Hong Kong?
Yes, I have I have two half siblings over there. My father lived there and he passed away there. He never moved here. My mother moved here to the United States back in the early 70s. But my dad used to fly back and forth visiting the family and then going back to Hong Kong.
A question on language. I guess you speak fluent Mandarin. Is that what you speak?
I speak 3 dialects of Chinese. I speak Cantonese. I'm most fluent in Cantonese because I grew up in Hong Kong. I speak Mandarin because I did business in China and Taiwan, so I learned Mandarin. I'm pretty fluent in it. And I speak the native Taiwanese language, which is sort of a Fujian-based base language. I understand it and speak it, but I'm not as fluent in that as I am in Cantonese and Mandarin.
Is Mandarin,
English, believe it or not, it's my third language. So when you hear me stutter or pause when I speak, it's because my thought is in a different language. I have to kind of get it to an English part of my brain.
Understood. Bill Rohn, you had a question, and then
Well,
Peter.
Robert, very good presentation. I spent a lot of time in China. I manufactured there for 30 years in Taiwan, China, and in Southeast Asia. But 2 years ago, we did a whole tour of China. I mean, it is a fascinating country with such a rich history and continues to grow faster than most of us could look at, because you go to any of their small towns, which are a couple million, and it is truly amazing. So I don't think people look down at China in any way. They're right at the top of the heap, and will continue to be. Although I keep wondering about the islands they're trying to make into countries in the middle of the China Sea.
Oh,
That's
let me comment on that.
Yep, go
Let me
ahead.
comment on that. All right. How many military bases do you think the United States have around the world?
Lots.
10? I don't know.
More.
Probably more than that, right?
I would think more.
Yeah, more than that. And how many military bases do you think China has outside of China? 0. So if the sea lanes, now the sea lanes are the lifeblood of trade for China. Any threat to that sea lane is a threat to Chinese security, national security. I think you would agree with that. But they have no way of protecting the sea lanes from the mainland if anything bad would happen. That is the motivation of, one of the motivations of why the Chinese government decided to build this island so that they can have a military base, a military presence there. Now, I would agree they didn't do it right. They should have, asked for consensus with the international government, the international community through the UN, and say, we are going to do this, here are the reasons, and let us do it. But the Chinese are too proud for that kind of stuff. The Chinese are, hey, we're going to do what we want to do. We're going to put a military base there to protect our rear end here. And because you guys are always, the West, you're always trying to beat up on me, always bully me. You sell me drugs, you drug my country, you steal our property, you do all that. Why would I need to ask you so nicely? I mean, I'm paraphrasing, obviously. I'm making a joke out of it, but
that's probably real. Peter, you got your hand up, I think. Peter, did you have your hand up?
Robert, I heard earlier that you're born in Japan and then moved to Hong Kong. What brought you over to Hong Kong or China?
Oh, well, my family, I'm actually native Taiwanese. I never lived in Taiwan. I was born in Japan because my parents happened to be there. So my father was Taiwanese, and during the war, he was supplying food to Japan because Taiwan was a Japanese territory at the time. My father was a Japanese subject citizen, if you will, and he was to make money back then. Everybody was poor. He was shipping food from Korea to Japan, and then the war ended, and he stayed in Japan, and that's where I was born. And then in 1956, he moved to Hong Kong because he saw Hong Kong as a secure place under British rule. And there you go. It was I mean, back in the 1800s, who knew the communists were going to take over, and who knew what the world was going to be like, 100 years later? But 100 years later, the world was thankful that Hong Kong was under British rule because, it was kind of a safe haven against the communist China. So he moved to Hong Kong and established himself over there. He didn't want to move back to Taiwan.
Thank you.
That was fascinating. Do we have any more questions? Obviously, everybody is really engrossed in your subject, which you present extremely well. I'm another one who's going to be reading your book.
Thank you.
And looking forward to it. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for taking the time to answer everybody's questions, and with such, I want to say, clear answers. It's easy when you're an expert in a field to try to explain things in more, I want to say, more sophisticated language than a layperson can understand, but you make the situation very clear. And I personally really enjoyed our time with you, and look forward to hearing more about you. Thank you everyone for being here today. We are dark next week because of Thanksgiving. So I wish everyone a happy and safe Thanksgiving, and we will meet virtually again on Thursday, December 3rd. So I look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you,
Take care.
everybody. I enjoyed the opportunity to speak of everybody, and I appreciate your questions. Thank you so much. Happy
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Bye.